There are two things people in small American neighborhoods always claim they respect: private property and minding their own business. The funny thing is, most folks are pretty good at the first one, but absolutely terrible at the second. I learned that lesson the year my internet cable got cut, and a woman who thought she ran the neighborhood accidentally invited the federal government onto our street. Looking back now, it almost sounds made up, the kind of story people exaggerate around a backyard barbecue after a couple of beers, but every word of it happened. And if anything, the real thing felt even stranger than the version I tell today. At the time, I was living on a quiet street called Briar Creek Court, tucked into a newer subdivision outside a mid-sized town in North Carolina. Nothing remarkable about the place. Similar houses, trimmed lawns, pickup trucks in driveways, American flags hanging from porches, kids riding bikes until sunset. It was the kind of neighborhood where everybody waved and half the people secretly disliked each other. I had bought my house 3 years earlier after a difficult divorce. It wasn't large, it wasn't fancy, but it was mine. That mattered. The front porch creaked when it rained, the paint needed work, and one stubborn oak tree dumped enough leaves every fall to fill a small landfill. But after everything I'd been through, the place felt like a fresh start. I worked remotely as a network systems analyst for a defense contractor. Before anybody imagines secret missions and spy movies, let me stop you right there. My job was mostly staring at monitors, reviewing performance reports, troubleshooting issues, and making sure certain systems never stopped communicating with each other. Boring work to most people. Important work to the people signing my paycheck. Because of that, internet service wasn't just something I used to watch movies. It was the foundation of my livelihood. If my connection went down for too long, projects stalled. Deadlines slipped. Questions got asked. So when fiber service finally came to our neighborhood, I invested heavily. I upgraded everything. Clean conduit, professional-grade hardware, backup equipment, labeled connections, organized cabling. My garage looked less like a garage and more like a small data center designed by someone with mild obsessive-compulsive tendencies. Most people never noticed any of it. Unfortunately, one person did. Her name was Denise Harper. At least that's what I'll call her. Denise lived 4 houses away on a corner lot that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Perfect grass. Perfect flowers. Perfect seasonal decorations. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, and if there were Olympic medals for neighborhood supervision, Denise would have won gold every year. She wasn't loud. That would have been easier to deal with. Instead, she was polite, smiling, controlled. The kind of person who could tell you she was reporting you for a violation while sounding like she was complimenting your shoes. Everybody knew her. Everybody had a story. She once measured a neighbor's basketball hoop because she believed it sat 3 inches too close to a property line. Another time, she spent 2 weeks documenting a resident whose trash can remain visible from the street after collection day. She called it preserving standards. Most of us called it Denise being Denise. For a while, she mostly ignored me. Then one afternoon, she noticed a small antenna mounted near the rear portion of my roof. It wasn't a satellite dish. It wasn't even visible from most angles. It was part of my internal networking setup. Nothing unusual. Nothing prohibited. But Denise spotted it anyway. That evening I received a message through the HOA app. Friendly reminder: all rooftop installations require approval before placement. I politely explained that the equipment had been there for months, was fully compliant, and wasn't considered an exterior modification under HOA guidelines. She responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Somehow that little icon felt more threatening than an argument. After that, she developed an interest in me. Every few weeks there was another question, another concern, another complaint that wasn't technically a complaint. She asked about utility markings in my yard. She questioned a contractor who wasn't even working for me. She once implied I might be operating communication equipment that exceeded neighborhood regulations, whatever that meant. The conversations always ended politely, but there was something underneath them, a tension I couldn't quite explain. It felt like she had decided I was violating a rule and was simply waiting to discover which one. Then came the Monday that changed everything. I had driven out early that morning to grab groceries and pick up a prescription. Nothing unusual. The weather was clear, traffic was light, and I remember feeling oddly optimistic about the week ahead. That feeling lasted exactly 30 seconds after I walked through my front door. The house felt wrong. Too quiet. No router lights blinking. No smart devices syncing. No notifications arriving. I checked my modem. Dead. Router. Dead. Connection. Gone. At first I assumed there was an outage. It happens. But something in my gut told me otherwise. A few minutes later I was standing behind my house near the utility easement, staring at something that immediately made my stomach drop. My fiber line wasn't damaged. It wasn't loose. It wasn't weathered. It had been cut. Cleanly. Deliberately. Like somebody had taken their time, lined up the tool, and made absolutely sure it would never reconnect itself by accident. And as I stood there staring at that severed cable, trying to process what I was looking at, I heard footsteps approaching behind me, and when I turned around, Denise Harper was standing there smiling. Denise stood there with her usual calm expression, hands folded neatly in front of her, looking less like a neighbor and more like someone inspecting a problem she had already decided wasn't her fault. Her eyes drifted toward the severed cable lying near the utility box, and she gave a small, disappointed shake of her head. "That's unfortunate," she said. "You should probably be more careful with how your wiring is managed." For a second I honestly thought I had misheard her. I looked from the cable back to her face and asked the question that had already formed in my head. "Did you cut my line?" Her smile never disappeared. Not even a little. "Of course not," she said. "I would never touch someone else's property." Then she turned and walked away before I could say another word. That should have been the end of the conversation, but somehow the way she said it made me more suspicious than if she had simply denied it angrily. I stood there staring after her until she disappeared around the corner. Then I started documenting everything. Years of working with technical systems had taught me a simple lesson. Evidence beats emotion every single time. I took photographs from every angle. Close-ups, wide shots, timestamps, utility markers, pull numbers, anything that might matter later. Then I called the provider. The representative confirmed there were no outages anywhere nearby. Every other customer was operating normally. A repair crew would arrive the following morning. Until then, I was offered a temporary hotspot that barely worked well enough to load email. It was better than nothing, but not by much. That evening, I posted a short message on the neighborhood app. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply stated that my fiber line had been intentionally cut, repairs were scheduled, and tampering with communications infrastructure was a serious matter. Within minutes, the comments started appearing. Some neighbors expressed sympathy. Others blamed teenagers. One guy suggested raccoons despite the fact that raccoons generally don't carry cable cutters. Then Denise entered the discussion. Her comment was perfectly crafted. She mentioned concerns about visible wiring, encouraged everyone to remain calm, and reminded residents to follow community standards while repairs were being completed. Reading it felt like watching someone casually sprinkle gasoline around a fire while insisting they were helping extinguish it. The next morning, the repair truck arrived shortly after 8. The technician introduced himself as Greg. Mid-40s, weathered face, coffee thermos that looked older than some of the houses in the neighborhood. He walked directly to the damaged line, crouched down, and examined it for less than 10 seconds before letting out a low whistle. "Well, that's not subtle," he muttered. "What do you mean?" I asked. He pointed at the severed cable. "That's a tool cut. Clean as I've ever seen. Somebody wanted this connection gone." Hearing someone else confirm what I already suspected somehow made it feel more real. Greg began running diagnostics while I answered a few routine questions. Then something changed. He was reviewing information on his tablet when his expression shifted. It wasn't dramatic, just a slight tightening around the eyes. The kind of reaction people have when a simple situation suddenly becomes more complicated. "What exactly do you do for work?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. I gave him the same answer I usually gave strangers. Network systems analyst. Defense contractor. Nothing exciting. He nodded slowly and looked back at the screen. "That explains it." "Explains what?" I asked. Greg hesitated. "Your connection isn't flagged like a normal residential account." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "What does that mean?" He glanced around before lowering his voice slightly. "Some traffic associated with your account routes through commercial priority exchanges. When your line went dark, automated monitoring systems noticed." I blinked. "Monitoring systems?" He nodded. "Normally, a residential service interruption doesn't raise any eyebrows. This one did." Suddenly, the severed cable at my feet seemed much bigger than a neighborhood dispute. Greg stepped away and made a phone call. Then another. When he returned, his posture had changed. More formal, less conversational. "Repair authorization has been expedited," he said. There are going to be some questions, though. Before I could ask what kind of questions, the first black sedan turned onto Briar Creek Court. Then another. Then a third. They moved slowly and parked with deliberate precision. Every conversation on the street stopped. A teenager riding a bicycle nearly crashed into a mailbox because he couldn't stop staring. Curtains shifted. Garage doors froze halfway open. Across the street, an elderly couple abandoned their morning walk and watched from the sidewalk. And then Denise appeared. Of course she did. She emerged from her driveway holding her clipboard like a sheriff responding to an emergency. Men and women stepped out of the vehicles. Nobody flashed badges dramatically. Nobody acted intimidating. If anything, they were almost boring in their professionalism, which somehow made them more intimidating. One approached me and politely requested identification. Another spoke with Greg. A third began photographing the utility area. Everything happened with calm efficiency. Denise slowly moved closer. "I'm the HOA president," she announced. Nobody seemed particularly impressed. One of the agents smiled politely and asked if she had observed anything unusual. Denise immediately launched into a well-rehearsed explanation. She described finding the damage, reporting concerns, monitoring neighborhood safety. Her answers came quickly, smoothly, almost too smoothly. I listened while standing a few feet away and couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Years spent reviewing system logs had trained me to notice patterns. Sometimes data becomes suspicious not because of what's included, but because of what's missing. Denise's story felt exactly like that. One of the agents thanked her for the information and then calmly explained why they were present. Because this line carried communications associated with protected commercial infrastructure, we're required to determine whether the damage was accidental or intentional. Denise's smile tightened slightly. The agent continued. If intentional tampering occurred, federal statutes may apply. There it was. The first visible crack. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. A flicker behind her eyes. Not panic exactly. More like someone rapidly recalculating a situation that had suddenly become much larger than expected. The agents interviewed me next. They reviewed my photographs, timestamps, work records, and documentation. One of them actually complimented how thoroughly I had documented everything. Meanwhile, Greg completed his diagnostics. Every result pointed toward the same conclusion. Deliberate targeting. No accidental damage. No environmental cause. No equipment failure. About 40 minutes later, another government vehicle arrived. This one carried official markings. A uniformed liaison stepped out and introduced himself. I immediately forgot his name because my brain was still struggling to process the fact that my internet outage had somehow attracted multiple federal agencies. He explained that protocol required an investigation whenever certain communication pathways experienced suspicious interruptions. They weren't accusing anyone. They were simply following procedure. That's when the situation took another turn. Across the alley lived a quiet neighbor named Russell. Nice guy, kept mostly to himself. Rarely attended HOA meetings. Rarely participated in neighborhood drama. Russell approached one of the agents holding his phone. "I think I might have something," he said. Every head on the street turned toward him. Russell explained that his security camera faced the utility easement behind our homes. After reading my neighborhood app post, he had reviewed the footage from the previous night out of curiosity. At 2:17 a.m., the camera captured someone approaching the utility area. The image quality wasn't perfect. Grainy night vision. Limited detail. But sometimes you don't need a perfect picture. Sometimes posture tells the story. The figure stopped near the cable, bent down, remained there briefly, then walked away. The agents reviewed the footage. Then they reviewed it again. Nobody said anything immediately. They didn't need to. Standing 20 feet away was Denise Harper, suddenly looking far less comfortable than she had an hour earlier. The walk matched. The height matched. The hairstyle matched. Even the habit of carrying a clipboard tucked beneath one arm appeared visible in the recording. One of the agents approached her and politely requested a private conversation. Denise attempted to maintain her composure, but little inconsistencies began appearing almost immediately. Her timeline shifted. Small details changed. Earlier statements no longer aligned perfectly with documented timestamps. Questions that had seemed simple suddenly required long pauses before answers arrived. The agents remained professional throughout the process, but their attention had clearly narrowed. The severed cable was photographed again, packaged as evidence, and logged into the investigation record. The entire neighborhood watched in stunned silence as the woman who had spent years documenting everyone else's behavior found herself becoming the subject of documentation instead. By early afternoon, my connection was fully restored. The modem lights came back one by one, blinking green like nothing had ever happened, and for a brief moment it felt almost ridiculous that a cut cable had managed to bring half the neighborhood outside and fill the street with government vehicles. But then I looked across the road and saw Denise standing alone in her driveway, and I knew this story was far from over. The agents eventually finished collecting statements and slowly departed. One sedan left, then another, until the street returned to its usual quiet rhythm. Yet something fundamental had changed. The illusion that Denise was untouchable had disappeared. People who normally avoided conflict suddenly found their voices. By that evening, the neighborhood app looked like a courtroom transcript. Old complaints resurfaced. Screenshots appeared. Stories people had kept to themselves for years started pouring out. Neighbors described being pressured over harmless issues, being photographed without permission, being threatened with violations that never existed. None of it had seemed important individually, but together it painted a picture of someone who had slowly confused authority with ownership. 2 days later, the HOA board announced an emergency meeting. Curiosity got the better of me, so I attended. The atmosphere inside the clubhouse felt completely different from every HOA meeting I had ever seen. Usually people complained about landscaping budgets or parking rules. This time nobody was talking. Denise sat at the head of the table, posture stiff, expression unreadable. The board members looked exhausted. In front of them sat a stack of documents that included incident reports, screenshots, statements, and confirmation that a federal inquiry remained active. Nobody needed dramatic speeches because the facts were already doing all the work. Denise spoke first. She insisted she had always acted in the neighborhood's best interests. She talked about maintaining standards, preserving property values, protecting the community. But there was something missing from every explanation. Accountability. She kept describing intentions while avoiding actions. Eventually, one board member asked the question everyone was waiting for. Did you touch the cable? The room became so quiet I could hear the air conditioning running. Denise looked down at the table. For several seconds, she said nothing. That silence answered more than any words ever could. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. She admitted she had become frustrated. She admitted she believed the equipment violated community standards. She admitted she wanted to force the issue. But even then she couldn't fully bring herself to acknowledge how far she had crossed the line. The board voted before the meeting ended. Unanimous. Effective immediately, Denise was removed as HOA president pending the outcome of the investigation. There was no shouting, no applause, no celebration, just a quiet recognition that a boundary had been crossed and trust had been broken. She stood up, collected her papers, and walked out without looking at anyone. Watching her leave felt strangely sad. Not because I thought she was innocent, but because power has a way of convincing people they're indispensable. The moment that illusion disappears can be hard to watch, even when they brought it on themselves. Later that evening, I was in my garage checking network diagnostics when I noticed Denise standing across the street. For a moment, I considered ignoring her, but instead I grabbed 2 coffees and walked over. She looked surprised when I handed one to her. "Why are you being nice to me?" she asked. I thought about that for a second. "Because this was never personal for me," I said. "You made it personal." She stared at the cup before finally taking it. The confidence she used to carry everywhere was gone. In its place was something closer to exhaustion. "I was trying to keep things under control," she said quietly. "Neighborhoods fall apart when nobody enforces standards." I nodded. "Maybe. But there's a difference between standards and control." She didn't argue. She didn't deny anything. She just looked down at the sidewalk. After a long silence, she asked a question that sounded less like a legal concern and more like genuine fear. "Do you think they're going to arrest me?" I answered honestly. "I don't know. That's not my decision." She nodded slowly, as if she already knew that answer before asking. Over the following months, the investigation continued quietly. No dramatic raids. No television cameras. Just interviews, paperwork, findings, and eventually consequences. Denise received substantial fines, restitution requirements, and a permanent record that followed her long after the incident ended. She resigned from the HOA entirely and stopped participating in neighborhood affairs. Some residents felt sorry for her. Others believed she deserved worse. People still disagree about it today. As for the neighborhood, something unexpected happened after she left. People relaxed. Conversations returned. Kids played outside longer. Neighbors solved small disagreements face-to-face instead of filing reports. It wasn't perfect, but it felt human again. And me? My internet connection has never been better. The provider upgraded my service, added redundant routing, and classified the account at an even higher priority level. Every now and then I sit in my garage listening to the quiet hum of equipment and think about how this entire chain of events started with one person deciding that her opinion mattered more than someone else's property rights. That's the part that stays with me. Not the federal vehicles, not the investigation, not even the HOA drama. Just that simple choice. Because most abuses of power don't begin with evil intentions. They begin when someone convinces themselves that the rules apply differently to them than they do to everyone else. Maybe Denise was a villain. Maybe she was just a woman who slowly lost sight of where responsibility ended and control began. Honestly, I'm still not sure. But I'd love to know what you think. Did she deserve everything that happened afterward? Or did the situation spiral far beyond what should have been a neighborhood dispute? Where should the line be between community standards and personal freedom? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I genuinely think reasonable people can disagree on this one. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a power-hungry neighbor, or someone who thought they had the right to interfere with your property, share your story too. Sometimes the most important lessons come from hearing what happened on somebody else's street before the same thing happens on your own.